Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We'll be discussing H-1B visas, specifically focusing on some key updates for 2025. And we'll also be covering the H-1B application process, including the upcoming registration and H-1B lottery. And then we'll dive a little bit into some employer compliance and some requirements that come along with that. My name is Deborah Medina. I'm one of the attorneys at Farmer Law PC. I have more than 10 years of experience working in business immigration. So feel free to shoot your questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. So as I was mentioning, today we'll cover some H-1B visa requirements and key updates, the registration and lottery process, compliance obligations for employers, and then we'll touch very briefly on some alternatives to the H-1B non-immigrant visa if the employee is not selected in the lottery. And like I said, we'll conclude with some Q&A session. So feel free to submit any questions as we go through the presentation. So first, what is the H-1B visa? So this is a temporary work visa designated for foreign professionals in specialized occupations. And that's the key word for H-1B visas. It must be a specialized occupation. And what does this mean? The H-1B visa allows foreign workers to be employed with a U.S. employer in jobs that require at least a bachelor's degree or its equivalent in work experience in a related field. The H-1B visa is valid for an initial period of up to 3 years, with the possibility of extending for an additional 3 years for 6 years total. And after that, individuals, or usually during the H-1B period, individuals can explore the permanent residency option through the green card process, usually the PERM process. So this is a very good alternative for employees that are currently in H-2 and TN visas, which don't necessarily provide a good path to the green card. Now, who can apply for an H-1B visa? There are very specific key requirements for the H-1B. For starters, like I mentioned before, it requires a bachelor's degree or equivalent work experience, a job offer from a U.S. employer in a specialty occupation. And what this means, specialty occupation, again, the job must require at a minimum a bachelor's degree in a related major for the occupation. The employer must demonstrate that the position meets the definition of a specialty occupation. And obviously this is done in working closely with your attorney to make sure that we are providing the required information to show that this is a specialty occupation. If the applicant is already in the US and they already hold H-1B status, they must be maintaining valid legal status in order to either do a change of employer and maintain their H-1B, or if we're going through the registration and lottery process to do a change of status without having to leave the US. And some examples of qualifying occupations that we see for the H-1B the most are engineers, veterinarians, financial professions, healthcare specialists, doctors, and there are many, many more options. And again, this is a good alternative to the H-2 and TN, where we see a lot of times there's a lot of specific rules regarding which occupations can qualify for those type of visas. So for the H-1B, there's a lot more options. So now moving on to the application process, as I mentioned before, somebody that has never held H-1B visa before must go through the lottery registration and lottery process. And for those already holding an H-1B visa, we can talk about the change of employer scenario. And again, for new applicants, I'll be explaining the registration and lottery process next. So the electronic registration, which is something fairly new for USCIS, which began in 2020, they implemented an electronic registration system for H-1B applicants. And this system is mandatory for all employers seeking to sponsor an H-1B worker that is subject to the cap. So registration opens every year in March. The one for this year, we finally have the dates. It's opening March 7th and will run through March 22nd, I believe. So during this very short period, the employers must submit the registration between the first and last date of the registration period, obviously. So the process is fairly simple, and it involves submitting basic information about your company and the position you're offering, along with the employee that you'll be sponsoring. And the registration fee is $215. The selection is conducted shortly after the registration period ends, and before April 1st, usually. These dates are usually subject to change depending on USCIS, but based on previous years, that's what we are expecting this year. In terms of the lottery and the cap, there are 65,000 regular visas available. And what this means is anyone that has at a minimum a bachelor's degree is included in those 65,000 regular visas. There's an additional 20,000 visas that are only available to individuals who have earned a U.S. master's degree or higher, but it must be from a U.S. institution. So in this, we cannot just use work experience or any other degrees to kind of try to equate it to a U.S. master's degree. It must be earned from a U.S. institution. So essentially, those individuals that have a master's degree from a U.S. institution get two chances at the lottery. USCIS will first select from the 20,000, again, from those individuals with a U.S. master's degree, and anyone that didn't get selected gets moved to the regular cap lottery. So because the demand for H-1B visas greatly exceeds the number of available spots, this is why USCIS conducts this random lottery system to select applicants. So again, this is not guaranteed. Just because you enter the registration, it does not guarantee an H-1B visa. However, based on issues in the last 2 to 3 years where a lot of companies were submitting duplicate registrations, or several companies were working together to submit the same employee in the lottery, this year USCIS is sort of getting tougher in implementing a beneficiary-centric registration system. And what this means is that they will be monitoring the information for each employee that's entered in the registration to make sure there are no duplicates. So they'll be monitoring the name, date of birth, and passport number for that employee. So any duplicates will be automatically removed. So they are hoping that this sort of limits or eliminates the duplicate entries and prevents fraud and maintains the integrity of the lottery. So the registration fee for the H-1B cap is $215. And of course, this is non-refundable. So even if you do not get selected in the lottery, again, this is not refundable. If the case is selected, if your registration is selected in the lottery, the employer will have 90 days to submit the actual H-1B petition to USCIS. And it comes with several filing fees. And the ranges that you see on the screen will depend on whether USCIS considers you a small employer or a regular employer. And that usually means 25, if you have less than 25 employees, you're considered a small employer. There's also the optional premium processing fee, which expedites the processing of the case to 15 days. Regular processing times, we are seeing 4 to 6 months, especially after the registration. We can see these processing times go up a little bit, so we can see closer to 8 months. And again, premium processing ensures a decision in 15 days. So now going into the benefits of the H-1B visa. Again, this is a non-immigrant temporary work visa, but the H-1B, when compared to other non-immigrant visas, does offer a number of benefits that you don't get with other work visas. So again, it provides an initial visa term of up to 3 years with the potential to extend for another 3 additional years for a total of 6 years. Another thing to consider is that if the employee travels outside of the US, any time they spend outside of the US can be what they call recapture and added back to the 6 years. So a lot of time employees will go back to their home country for an extended vacation or travel for work. So all that time can be added back to the H-1B to complete the 6 years. It also allows for sponsorship of dependents under the H-4 visa. And then another benefit of the H-4 visa and H-1B is that eventually dependents can obtain work authorization. And then again, the H-1B visa is also a very good pathway to permanent residency through the PERM process. So the H-1B visa is considered dual intent. So even though it's a non-immigrant temporary visa, USCIS will not consider the employee to abandon their non-immigrant status, even if they begin the green card or PERM process, which is an issue that sometimes can come up with the H-2 and TN visas. So for employers, it's important to remember that the visa is employer specific. So meaning that it's tied to the specific company, the job, and the location. So anytime there's any type of change to those 3 categories, USCIS must be informed. And then if the employee is not selected in the H-1B lottery, there are other alternatives, visa options, which will not really go into a lot of detail today because each one, has a lot of requirements. But just to list a few, the TN visa for Mexican and Canadian citizens, the O-1 visa, which is for individuals with extraordinary abilities, L-1 visas for intra-company transferees, and the J-1 visa, which is for exchange programs and internships. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them to our Q&A. Okay, I'll give you guys a few more minutes to see if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, we'll be sharing this presentation to anyone that attended today. If you have any questions that come up as you review this webinar, please feel free to reach out to us. I have our information up on the screen. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Okay, I see that we have 2 questions. Omar, if you wouldn't mind reading them out loud.
Yeah, of course. The first one is, hello, can you share some light on the new H-1B stamping rules in which came into effect, such as 12-month period for stamping renewal?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? You just say stamping?
Stamping renewal?
I'm too sure what that refers to. I'm sorry. If you want to send it to me and I can respond later over email, can we move on to the second one?
Yeah, of course. If we have an employee with H-2B visa, can we apply for the H-1B?
If they're in which visa?
With the H-2B, are they able to apply for the H-1B?
So it's a little more complicated with the H-2A and H-2B because I know there are specific requirements in terms of how long they can remain in the US and they must finish the certification period. So if, like I said, the H-1B, if selected in the lottery, the employer has 90 days to apply for the H-1B. Send the petition to USCIS, which means that if the person in H-2, if their certification period ends before that, they still have to leave the US. Another thing to consider is when USCIS approves the H-1B petition, the official start date will be October 1st. So if that certification period ends before October 1st, the employee must still leave the US, from my understanding. So they can apply, but it won't be such an easy process where they might have to leave the US and re-enter in H-1B, in the H-1B visa status, and of course go through the entire process at the consulate to obtain their H-1B visa before they can re-enter.
We have a new question, Deborah. Is there a lottery once a year in March?
Yes, so the lottery is every year in March. The dates are not always going to be the same. So USCIS will announce the specific registration dates about a month before. This year we got them on February 5th. that the lottery will run from March 6th through the 22nd, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. So, but yes, the lottery is every year. Every year there's 85 or 65,000 regular cap, plus an additional 20,000 for a U.S. master's degree. So a lot of times people that do not get their employees selected in the lottery will continue to try, especially if they're really looking to, for that, easier path to the green card that you might not get with a TN visa or an H-2 visa. So I see somebody, Claudia, you have your hand up, but I don't believe we have the microphone enabled for participants. So if you haven't already, enter your question in the Q&A.
Yeah, actually, she did it.
Okay, perfect.
The question is, after the 6 years completed, can we apply again?
Yes, so after the 6 years, if you want to continue to employ the employee in H-1B, they would have to go through the lottery again. One thing we didn't really cover during this webinar, but we will cover in other webinars when it comes to the perm process and the green card process, and I can mention right now briefly, is that once you get to certain steps in the perm process, green card process, and I mean an I-140 approval, there is no limit on the H-1B any longer. So as long as the employee has an I-140 approval notice, they can continue to extend their H-1B in 3-year increments indefinitely. And indefinitely means until they obtain their green card. So there are options. And again, this is a really good option for employers who want to sponsor their employees for a green card. This is usually the best, easiest path to ensure that there are no gaps in employment and that they can continue to employ this person for many years without having to worry about, the 6 year is what we call the max out or cap on H-1B. And again, H-1B is dual intent, so there's no concerns with traveling or getting to certain steps in the green card process, and having to worry about the employee losing their non-immigrant status or their visa. Any other questions, Omar?
Nope. For now, those are all the questions.
Okay, perfect. And again, thank you everyone for joining us. If you think of any questions or you have any other concerns, please feel free to reach out to us directly, and we'll be more than happy to assist.